The following is a presentation of the Healthcare Facilities Network. Hello, and welcome to the Healthcare Facilities Network. I am your host, Peter Martin, president of Gosselin Martin Associates. As always, I thank you for clicking on to our YouTube channel. And we are here today, or I'm here today, joined by a panel, and I am very thankful to the panel. We had some technical difficulties prior to recording, so I thank them for hanging in there with me, some audio issues on my end. This is episode 3 of what we are calling Filling the Pipeline, and I'm appreciative to my guests. So episode 3, Filling the Pipeline, I'd ask my guests if they could please introduce themselves. And Nancy, why don't we just start with you?
Hi there, my name is Nancy Vanasse. I'm an assistant director of career services at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. And I work with our facilities engineering students and our energy systems engineering students.
Thank you, Nancy. Clay.
Clay Ciolek. I'm on the West Coast in Washington State, and good day to you all. And been with as a facilities manager now for over 30 years now.
Excellent. Thank you, Clay. Jordan.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Jordan Smith. I'm the Administrative Director of Facility Operations for 2 of our AdventHealth campuses in Florida. I've worked for the organization for the last 10 years, and prior to facility management, I was in the contracting world. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Peter.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jordan. Last but not least.
Yes, hello everyone. Steve Call with Washington State University, professor here, again, Washington State. And my research focuses on healthcare facility management, optimizing not only the facility program, but the workforce behind it. So this is a conversation that's near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming, Steve. So I just noticed as you guys were introducing yourselves, we're coast to coast. We're down in the Southeast, and if we had Lamar in the middle, we would be covering the country. Instead, we're flying over from east to west, and nobody wants to go down south because I heard it's a little bit hot down there these days. So what I'd like to do first is I would like to just review, and I'm going to share my screen. As I said, this is the 3rd episode of our Filling the Pipeline. And to that end, what I wanted to do was just put up a slide that shows what we talked about in our first 2 sessions. And I want to ask my panelists, if there's anything that stood out or any thoughts post, and also just to catch people up for where we were. I know that everybody can read. I don't need to read a slide to you folks. You can see what's up there. But is anything, as you've thought about it, and this was a couple of months ago that we met, anything on this list that stands out to you, or anything you think we should discuss a little bit further? And again, for those of you who aren't familiar, the goal of Filling the Pipeline and the goal of the Healthcare Facilities Network is to hopefully bring more people into our profession. Somebody asked me this morning, well, are you looking to bring in managers or supervisors? And I said, no, we're looking, we are across the board, tradespeople all the way up to VP and everybody in between. I don't think that we can be selective in who we want to bring in because we need people. So Filling the Pipeline is across the board in all facilities. And so our goal with this particular segment is to hopefully think of ways to accomplish that goal. So that little diatribe over. Anybody have any thoughts on what we discussed in our first episode, our first 2 episodes?
Let me start and just say, I know the effort is to recruit a broad group of folks. So we're talking technicians, managers, senior level. And I think there are, while the goal is to bring all those folks in, I do think there are unique approaches to each one of those different work groups.
Yes.
It's not the same approach. So sometimes we just say facilities, or we'll say facility management, and we kind of broadly brush the approaches that are required to attract and retain everyone, but the reality is there are some unique issues. I think everybody knows that, but the nuances as we speak about this, I think it's important to say, hey, we're talking about how do we recruit technicians, how do we recruit senior level executives versus kind of a broad brush. So that's probably something that I would just highlight.
Thank you.
As we speak today.
Yep, very definite from a strategic perspective.
Building off of that too, Peter, your fourth bullet point there, talent acquisition. I couldn't agree more that talent acquisition is inundated with requests for clinical staff. With post-COVID, the mass migration, whatever we call that, or terms that we use for that, people retiring, people moving out of the industry, trying to recruit new staff, and their focus and they're behind with our frontline production force, and so it's difficult for facilities management to get a seat at the table and to get our rightful share of the recruiting thought power that's needed in today's environment.
Yes, absolutely. Along those ends, I was there was an article that came out in Modern Healthcare. I read it online on July 9th, and it was talking about executive level talent, finding executive level talent. So it wasn't specific to our director. So, executives and C-levels and above. And I thought the article was interesting. The very first sentence says this industry is just under enormous pressure and stress. Absolutely. So we talk about that here. They also talked about, though, how at the executive level, at the C level, people are leaving because of burnout, retirement, and other opportunities that are available to them. Again, exactly what we're seeing here. They talked about the pinch of salary and how salaries are rising and going up. Again, a little bit about what we're seeing here. But the reason I bring it up is I was reading it through our lens of filling the pipeline. Do you think that the challenges they're facing at the executive level, does that trump from an organizational level? Does that trump what we're trying to do here from the director? I guess, can organizations do both? And Jordan, it goes to what you were just talking about, that bullet 4, with these hospital teams being overwhelmed because there are so many accountabilities. Does the executive level rise a little bit above our director level at the FM level? I don't know what the answer is, but that was a thought that came to me as I was reading that article. Anybody have thoughts on that, on what that might mean potentially?
Peter, I think of one thing that could affect across the board, probably pick a level, it's the same thing. It's when turnover occurs too frequently at that senior level. And that to me is a disruptor from there down. It seems like we might be able to handle that kind of a turnover on the bottom up, or see it's sometimes a lot of turnover in the vendored services. And that's always a challenge to stay on top of. But I don't know if the frequency, if you're seeing a trend in that kind of frequency. But I enjoy working with my administration here at a local level. It gets a little different the further up the chain you go, but I like being in sync with them, and I could imagine trying to reestablish that relationship on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, agreed. That's one of the things that's concerning to me as we look at the bigger picture of, employee turnover and employee movement, which is all good. I mean, that's what we're dealing with these days. The world has changed a little bit, but what are those downstream impacts if you have senior level leadership that's turning over? And I think hospital presidents typically leave every 3, Steve, you may know this through some of your research. Are they like 3 to 5 years before they move along? But there's definitely a downstream impact if your leadership is turning over that frequently.
Yeah, Mark, Peter, you make a good point about the downstream impact. So if you think about the pipeline, bringing people in to the pipeline, and then at the end of the pipeline being prepared to be an executive level type FM role, there's challenges all along the way. And so what my research has shown is the traditional model that's kind of been common over the decades is, again, bringing people in as technicians. They're in that role for a decade. They eventually are deemed competent to be a manager. They're hired as a manager. They're in that entry-level management type role for 5 or 6 years. And after 20, 25 years in the industry, they might be ready for a senior level role. And in that time, by the way, most of them have gone back to school and gotten degrees and those sort of things. The challenge, so here we are today where we have this major shortage of talent. And it's interesting to me that it's still, there's still a lot of resistance to saying that traditional model I'm not to say it's a wrong model, it's just not working the way that it needs to work now because of the immense amount of demand for senior level, director level talent. And part of the reason why that downstream is impacted is because if we're hiring folks in without bachelor degrees, with very limited kind of leadership management skills, and because for a number of reasons, some of it is the fact that pay is low, and so we're not able to maybe attract the best candidates, the most qualified potential candidates. It just kind of limits, it creates barriers in that pipeline. And so here we are today where we're scratching our heads wondering why we don't have enough executive level, senior level talent qualified. It's because that, again, it goes back to the beginning of the pipeline, and we're not developing talent, we're not bringing in talent that have the potential to do that.
That's interesting.
Or that talent wants to leave, right? And they seek other opportunities, and it's hard. You don't get that employee that stays with you for 10 years and you can develop them.
Yeah.
You start over fresh with somebody new, and maybe they do have some experience, but when you start over with somebody new, it's knowledge.
Yeah, if you're able to recruit a high potential candidate, as Pete, you mentioned, and Jordan, there are a lot of opportunities outside of healthcare that actually pay better from entry and mid-level. They pay significantly better. And let's just bring up the elephant in the room. It's actually not as demanding. I mean, healthcare is an extremely demanding role, even though it's very fulfilling. And so if you're young in your career and you've got great potential, it's very difficult to stay in healthcare for most folks because they can get higher pay, better work-life balance. And so it's just a difficult situation for retention.
This is Peter Martin. If you or your organization is interested in advertising or partnering with the Healthcare Facilities Network, including sponsoring content, then please email me using the barcode in the lower right of your screen. From the trades level to the vice president level, from planning, design, construction, project management, compliance, safety, and security, the Healthcare Facilities Network reaches FM people where FM people are. Nancy, I'd like to ask you in a minute, if you could, you work, you come at it from Mass Maritime and working with your folks, and you don't work just in healthcare, you're across the board. So I want to ask you what you see in other industries relative to, from your perspective, relative to turnover and the stability of leadership. But before you answer that, Steve, you had mentioned, and this brought up an interesting point, talking about that traditional career ladder where, you may stay 10 years, and sometimes in some organizations, and years ago, when you stay 10 years at a place, you almost advanced up the ladder just because you had that level of seniority. It was kind of like, it was what those expectations were. You hit the years, and then it was your turn coming up. And I did an episode for the Facilities Network, Generations of Healthcare Facilities Management, and it's with a group of millennials, and we had a great discussion about their perspective on things, talking about work-life balance, career ladders, career paths, and they mentioned that how they don't view succession and career paths in that manner. They don't see it as, okay, I've been there 10 years, I deserve this slot. And it was just an interesting perspective. They're like, we look at it, you do your job well, 2 to 4 years, whatever that is, you move up. And so generationally, I think that is kind of out the door, out the window with the new folks coming in. Any
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
and it's not, it shouldn't be a generational difference of perspective. The reality is it should be based on competency.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So you're saying, let's throw out this whole, you haven't been here a decade, so that is really not working. Right. So let's just that model can't work because we have to train and develop people quicker. So you're right. I think the right thing to focus on is saying, look, we're basing our promotion on competency. Are you prepared? Do you have the skills necessary to fill that role? If you've been here 20 years or 2 months, I mean, are you prepared for that role? That's the real issue. But that takes a little work internally from the organization to say, have you defined the competencies expected of every role in your organization? And I would argue that most have not done that at all. It's very loose. I mean, there are some job descriptions, we'll say, these, but the reality is, have you really identified the 10 or 12 competencies? And so that's I think important to consider.
Clay, Jordan, any comment on that? Do you agree with that on organizations?
No, I do. And I was going to add too, competencies are something that are gained and earned in my mind, and some of this has to go back to aptitudes and talents, right? I mean, just because you haven't done it before, do you have the skills and abilities that you're going to need to be successful in that role, right? And so if we're going to fast track somebody, what are the qualities that we're looking for that make them a good candidate to be selected for that fast track program, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're not always hard skills, right? There's a lot of soft skills built into this, and how do you measure those? There's different methodologies on that, but yeah, it's important to look at these different ways of doing it, because historically that worked in the past when we had a lot of time and there wasn't a huge retirement wave, but now it's I think it's a different perspective that's needed to accelerate that development.
I can tell, over the years how much the portfolio of what's required in facilities management has, grown, and you don't always have the background on all one of those. I've seen colleagues, and if I had to do it over myself all over again, I'd be adding potentially an MBA to that. And that's kind of how I see things happening. I mean, systems have their own platforms and everything, and sometimes that's a menagerie to work through, but just being able to, in a short order, pencil something out because those formulas or whatever are needed for, whether it be financial or other things, we're just hitting on a higher expectation of what's all going into that job description, especially as there's been a reduction or truncation of other roles that used to support some of those measures.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you're speaking to job descriptions. We see them on the recruiting end. We'll have an organization, they'll give us the job description, and then you start to read it and question them on it. And sometimes, again, I think I've said it before, it's almost like your engineer on your construction projects, your mechanical engineer, they may be copying and pasting from another hospital job into your hospital job. And then you're looking at your documents and you're saying, hey, this doesn't work for us. I think similarly, that happens a lot with job descriptions. You just take it and you pass it down without really looking at it. And I think it goes to a number of things. One, people are overwhelmed. And then two, talking about organizations should realize there's no perfect candidate, especially these days with all these competencies that you guys are talking about. Nancy, I want to go to you, going back to that question. What do you see, from your end relative to organizations, stability, leadership remaining the same? Any insights, thoughts?
So, well, our students are actually faced with many different industries within facilities management. So just in that alone, it's just so competitive.
Yeah.
We do have some students who will do some internships at hospitals, but we're not seeing them getting hired out of those internships. And I don't know if that's because maybe they don't hire, the lower level type of candidate, and they're trying to hire, middle to upper level management. That I'm not sure about. But I do know that they are faced with many different types of industries that they go in. But I'm also seeing that, they're probably looking to change jobs anyway every 2 to 3 years. So,
Yeah.
it's kind of that conundrum, you might want to hire somebody out of college, but that person, this generation at least, they're looking to change their jobs, quite frequently. I don't know if that's changed over the years so much.
And Nancy, I was going to ask what, and maybe if you can share this, but what's the average starting salary for your FM graduate, your facility engineering graduates out of your program?
So I know that they're working on some of the more current numbers. I can probably tell you from say 2 years ago, and I'm going to assume it's going to go up at that point, but a facilities engineer average salary was probably about 63 to 67. And now it's even higher. So I know some of my students would come back and they would tell me they would get hired by, X, Y, and Z, and they're making, some are, I'm going to use a defense, company, right? So they're coming out and they might be making, 70 to 80 right out of school, which is crazy.
Yeah, and so your question, just to put that in perspective, the average starting salary for an entry level, supervisor or manager within a healthcare organization is about 65,000. But that's with somebody with 10 years of experience.
You're not gonna attract. No.
Yeah. So it's a conundrum, right? Because their healthcare isn't offering the level of pay, and if they are, then they're faced with kind of internal political issues with people that are making that and have 10 years of experience, and so it's an interesting situation. But that's one reason, one really important reason why that's not happening.
And I know my organization does market studies, but we only compare that market with other healthcare facilities, right? So if we're not doing market studies across aerospace and other industries, we're always going to be in that closed cycle.
Nancy, you guys, I know you've done at Mass Maritime really strong engineering programs and marine engineering, et cetera, et cetera. But are there one or two industries where your students most typically find themselves in?
Right now I'm seeing a lot of our students are going into engineering firms, a lot of construction. So a lot of construction management, project management within the construction fields, and some are at hospitals, right? So we have a local hospital where he constantly takes our students on for internships. And I know he hires, but he's a part of the state. So and that might be different. Other areas, I mean, it kind of varies. I don't think there's one really strong one over the others. A lot of them go into building facilities engineering, into those commercial buildings, the sky rises down in, say downtown Boston or the downtown areas of major states. Some students are going into the defense as not being commissioned as officers, but just going into the defense industry. So I think it varies a lot, but I'm just trying to think where else. Oh, and then life sciences, of course. Life sciences, the pharmaceuticals. They seem to have like a little love affair with the pharmaceuticals as well. But they're also going to power plants. We have a couple, going to the nuclear plants, power plants, Eversource, National Grid, companies like that.
So it is a conundrum. And I guess how would you have students coming out of college, they've got debt, probably substantial debt for many folks coming out. We have an industry, healthcare, that does need people terribly. Salaries aren't as high in healthcare as they are in some of those alternatives. And also, and I'm assuming that today's college student, this is an assumption, I could be wrong, they may not want to start at the low end of the totem pole. Maybe they want to come in a little higher. Nancy, you could tell me if kids are looking for that. But how do you as an organization, or how does healthcare deal with some of those issues to attract those students who can become that future pipeline? Any thoughts on that?
Well, what I can tell you, Peter, is I do think our students are looking at salaries. And I see it,
Is it salaries more than title, Nancy? Do you know?
I'm gonna guess salaries because that's really what I hear more so. You hear the joke that they want to come out with the CEO. Maybe there's some truth to that. I don't know. But I can just, and even the co-ops, when we post our co-ops or our internships in our portal, the kids are trying to apply to the ones that pay the most. And, I try
Yeah.
to tell them, like, you don't worry about that now. You worry about that when you graduate. You're in it now for the experience. And so I do think that I do think our students and our young grads are looking at pay.
Gentlemen, what do you guys think? Any thoughts?
Just this past week, I got contacted by a gentleman that used to work for me, and he's still in the other healthcare system, which I was in. It's just a small system, about 9 hospitals. And he let me know that he was laid off. And then fortunately, within a week, he got picked up by something, out of healthcare, but still within his career path. So that was exciting to see. What he was part of, I found out, was about 230 employees that were let go out of that 8 hospital system that were all within the support service areas. And it's because the hospitals, millions of dollars in the hole.
Yeah.
But I don't know of any hospital that's not in the hole these days. And I could just see that where if an opening were to occur, at what point do they say, is administrative decisions, and okay, we're going to cut it off at this level, and who remains essential when those decisions have to be made, and how is that going to impact being able to bring somebody in at a higher salary level only to get back to the same bottom line that they're experiencing? So that was like, wow, where's it gonna end here? And hopefully we're gonna bottom out here, and hospitals can start going the other direction. But I don't know how long that's going to take. They can freeze capital, but at some point the doors still have to stay open.
Right.
And that was just a real-time experience for me, because I thought, if I'm told no, I can't hire, even though I have a need, then that just, puts the pressure on everything else. And if you have a manager, that open spot for a manager, and they're coming in, they may be blind to the situation, but if they were to be able to understand, well, I had staff that I no longer am allowed to have those positions for, would that change their mind as far as saying yes?
Yes. Yeah, I would bet it would. I would bet it would. Thank you for watching this episode of the Healthcare Facilities Network.